My name's Chris Kaleiki. I've been a game dev probably, I don't know, 17 years now, something like that. Most of the time was working at Blizzard on World of Warcraft, and I started there in my early 20s as a game designer, and it was like my dream game and my dream IP and all these things like that. So for a long time, very long time, it was like nirvana just to work on the game that I was really passionate about and that I just played just for fun. So a lot of my career experience was just like working on the game during the day and playing it at night, which doesn't sound too healthy, but actually it was just a lot of fun. And so, yeah, it's funny that you said you're kind of a RuneScape guy because I have noticed this now. Like RuneScape has become more of a thing in the zeitgeist or in with players, and I think it makes sense. There's a lot of players who played WoW, and then those who played RuneScape, and they're kind of like these two groups. So I think probably the WoW one's a bit bigger, but yeah, RuneScape is I can understand why people have such a emotional attachment to that game because that was the same kind of feeling I had with WoW too.
Did you ever dabble to the dark side, or were you strictly a WoW guy?
I played everything that came out. I RuneScape is one of the ones that I've never actually seriously played. I played it like a day or two with some friends to kind of check it out, but then never really got deep into it. So I'm always when I'm talking to folks, I'm like, if they did play RuneScape, I'm like, what did you really like about it? Usually it was kind of like this, it's always what I always hear is like player stories of I was trying to, there's this one item, I was trying to get these sort of things, which makes perfect sense. But no, I never really got hardcore into it.
So you come from a lengthy career in game development, but also over at Blizzard, like you mentioned, and working on such a giant title like WoW for a long period of time. Then why make the move to start your own studio, make your own games?
Yeah, it's a good question. It was a few things. One of the biggest ones was, and I had made this video after I left Blizzard actually, and it kind of went viral. Asvin reacted to it, and I detailed why I left the studio because while I was there, I worked a lot with players and creators and the community to develop the game because I did a lot of class balance and PvP and these sort of things, which is always a very high community engagement part of the game. And the reasons why I left was pretty much what's in that video. Is just that I felt after I played WoW Classic, I felt like the World of Warcraft mainline game drifted a lot from its original vision and original gameplay loops. It just didn't feel like the same game anymore. And then I kind of realized like how much had really changed. And I just kind of was starting to really fall out of love with the mainline game just because it was just a very different game at that point. Fast forward to today, there's multiple offerings of WoW, right? There is the mainline game, there's classic, there's hardcore, there's all these other versions. And that has been very successful for them. I think that was the right move, and it was one that they didn't want to do for a long time. But you don't really work, full time on WoW Classic. It is what it is, right? It's frozen in time. So that wasn't really an option, and there wasn't any other project at the studio that really interested me. So I also wanted to challenge myself. The second major thing is just to challenge myself as a game developer, as a game designer, because so much of AAA with developers is you're working on one little thing in one larger game, and a lot of them, most Western AAA studios are like service games, and so you're really that's all you're kind of doing is like working on this one little thing of this one game forever. And I kind of felt like, am I really a game developer? Am I really a game designer if I'm just really just a class designer on World of Warcraft, which I did love doing. And so for those reasons, the game had shifted. I wanted to challenge myself. And then the third one was, and this is a broader thing perhaps of, this is upstream maybe of what was going on with WoW, which was the studio culture had shifted a lot. When I first started the studio, they had one building. Now they have something like 30 something, it's the studio has massively scaled since when I started. And one of the biggest challenges of when you scale is that it becomes harder to keep like the culture that was there in the very beginning. what most companies do is they create, a list of values, and that's like what that orc statue, if you've ever seen it or visited the studio, is. It's like trying to create value so that everyone kind of follows that. But it's really, really hard to scale the growth. And I felt like a lot of the original principles and way of working had changed a lot, and I wanted to get back. Like I wanted the time machine to go back. And that's kind of what I did here at Notorious is I rebuilt the culture from what I enjoyed in my early years there, which is just a lot of like freedom and autonomy and trust and less bureaucracy and approvals and these things like that. And then also kind of work on a game that I think is a stepping stone to what I thought WoW Classic is.
And really quickly, correct me if I'm wrong. Are you also paid homage to your WoW roots with the naming of the studio as well?
That's true. Yeah, naming things is one of the hardest things to do. I feel like any creator or someone who is a creator knows that pain. Whether it's naming a video or naming a game or a company, whatever. And so I named the studio, Notorious Studios, and Notorious was actually in my World of Warcraft guild that I had even before I joined Blizzard. And yeah, that was a name that we came up with when we were just jumping around in Ironforge, like pitching names. So it has a long history.
I love it. I love it. I love those roots and that drawback too. Speaking of names, when it comes to
Yeah,
Legacy, Steel, and Sorcery, how does a name like that come to fruition?
that was another thing. We had like, everyone on the team pitch names, and we had this huge whiteboard of all these different names on there. That was another challenging one to come up with a name for. And Legacy, we like Legacy because um what we're trying to do with the game is do a next generation of fantasy RPG. And so we're really kind of reflecting on all the past art and games and everything in that genre and pay homage to it and try to like distill it. So one subgenre of fantasy is what's called um, shoot, what's it called? Sword and Sorcery, I think is what it's called. And if you think about um, Conan like in fantasy, that's kind of an example. And then you have dark fantasy, and you have high fantasy, and you have low fantasy, etc. So that's mainly what Legacy, Steel, and Sorcery is trying to pay homage to that. And we like Legacy because it's kind of like our legacy of like in the past working on fantasy games, and then also just like I said, paying homage to the genre.
Yeah, I don't think it gets talked about enough, but I can't imagine making a game, especially nowadays with you got dozens, if not hundreds of titles dropping every single week on some form or
Right.
level, right? And
Yeah.
so it's crazy how much time should probably be committed to naming the game because that can really make or break you. We've all seen some great names and we've all seen some pretty bad names.
Well, I'm not trying to like take shots here or anything, but I remember when I first heard the title, Claire Obscura Expedition 33, I was like, ooh, I don't know if that's really great. It's like a hard name to remember and like to spell, at least for Americans or whatever. But I really feel like if the game is good enough, the name doesn't really
That's true. I mean,
matter.
that's true. Yeah.
But maybe that's copium. I don't know.
Yeah, maybe the game is that good. But speaking of your game too, if a casual were to come by and just look at the name, how would you describe this game to them?
Yeah, so in MMOs, there is this feature, even I think in RuneScape, most of them, and it came really from Ultima Online. There's this idea of world PvP, and world PvP is not like arena, it's not battleground, it's not structured with rules. It is unscripted PvP that can happen in the open world. And what the player's goal is to do is usually to kill creatures, to gather materials, and then bring them back to town and upgrade and progress. And the reason why I think world PvP, so Blizzard has this thing called BlizzCon, where they used to do it every year, where you just go there and like you'd meet with your guild and these things like that. It was like mecca for Blizzard gamers, especially WoW ones. And usually all these stories people would talk about like in their hotel rooms or just at their guild dinners or whatever, or all these like stories that they would have in the game. And most of them I would always notice were like world PvP. At least my guild was a lot of world PvP ones, because if you're like killing Ragnaros for the thousandth time, it's just not really like an interesting story there. The most interesting ones is crazy things that happen in the world, right? And if you look at like what games have been in the past like 5-10 years or so, the ones that have really risen to the top are the ones that create all these little stories. Like PUBG is a good one. There's all these stories you could tell of all your matches of like, got really close to the circle and then it was me versus this other guy and I ran him over with my car or whatever.
Yeah.
So if the more stories and things that pop out, I think of the experience, that is what I think modern gamers are looking for. And it's what I think is the most interesting and fun to do in a game is to create all these rules that create these stories, right? So anyway, that's a long answer to say the game is basically a world PvP RPG game. It's action combat. It's class based. So we spend a lot of energy making all the classes feel really cool, and I think are like the leader in RPG action. If you think about classes. And yeah, that's what the core experience of the game right now is like the ultimate world PvP game. Right now, there is, and when we started the studio, there was no, I don't think really even tagline for this genre, but it has an extraction element to it. So you can call it like an RPG extraction as well. That's like a new emerging, really like small subgenre. And yeah, so that's another way to look at it too, is it's an RPG extraction game.
Yeah, I looked at it as kind of that subgenre. It's like a, I don't want to call it a niche within a niche because there's a big audience for it, but it's a PvP
Yeah.
PvE extraction. So in case people don't know, you can fight players, but you can also fight monsters and creatures, get out with your loot, upgrade everything. I love the concept and I love the idea, but how do you guys come together and say, okay, we're making a game, we want it to be a PvP PvE extraction, or like you said, RPG style as well?
Yeah, because a lot of us just believed in kind of what I was saying, which is that world PvP is such a
Yeah.
cool part of MMOs and of games. What if it had its own game? And that was the original idea. But there is all those also this bigger, larger goal, which is to use it as a stepping stone to build something larger with legacy IP over time.
Yeah, I love that.
And if you are going to build something larger, like an MMO, which is kind of like where the North Star is, then you have to build a PvP. You have to build a lot of these like core systems, which are in this game first. And so it's a good like stepping stone game to that. But I agree with you. I think there's just not a lot of these action PvP RPG games. If you think about it, most PvP games are shooters or they're
Yep.
MOBAs. There's just not a lot of like third person action PvP games for whatever reason. And so I think it is an underserved audience for sure.
Yeah, because when I was playing the game, it just felt like, and I know you have drawbacks to WoW, and also I think that crosses very much over to the PvP of RuneScape. But like I was playing, I felt like if you were a PvP or a PK or in one of those games, this is something you would greatly enjoy because we'll talk about this later. But typically we see extraction
Yeah.
shooters, not extraction RPGs. But I'm gonna
Right.
save that for probably more of a future topic. When it comes to inspirations, though, drawing, because this game looks like and I mean this in a good way, there are
Yeah.
draws to so many games that I've played. There's a sense of familiarity when I'm playing this game, but I can't nail it down exactly, right? Like an inventory system that feels like an extraction or like a Tarkov. The game itself feels like a lot of survival games and it feels good, and the creatures and monsters have some sort of familiarity if you've played these MMOs. So what were your inspirations as a team?
Yeah. Our team, like most game dev teams, at least the good ones, play a lot of games and have a lot of really great, they could, I could play. We had this game where you play like 3 seconds of a game soundtrack, and they know exactly what game that is and which edition or whatever. And so, yeah, it's funny that you mentioned that. Yeah, so the inventory system there, we decided to do not a grid system, but instead of, I forgot what is it called? Yeah, like where like the actual I guess it is called a grid system where it's like a 2x2 or 1x3, that sort of thing. I feel like that is completely superior to the 1x1 grids. Even even I think WoW would be better if that system was in there. But so yeah, we had that, and it comes from, yeah, Tarkov has that, but so did like Diablo, and it's been around for a long time, Arcanum, etc. So yeah, we have that because we felt that would be really strong for the game. The combat system probably was the hardest thing for us to make. If you've noticed, most great combat games actually aren't Western; they're like usually Eastern games. For whatever reason, I think they just have a stronger culture of making combat over there, or third-person action anyway. I think Western is way better at shooters. But so we had to like really learn how to make that combat system. A lot of influences. We started with Dark Souls, that formula of light, heavy attack, and like attack frames, and there's all these like little things that go into that combat system, magnetism, all these things. And so yeah, we started with that, and then I blended it, and it was always the idea to blend it with more of like what an MMO has, with like action, like spells and abilities, that feel impactful in the combat loop, but then not take over the entire combat system so that you never really want to use your weapon,
Yeah, you still
right?
gotta use auto. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's a really challenging thing to do, because usually auto some people on the team call them auto attacks, even though they're not auto. You have to press
That's
press
what I
the
did right
ability.
there. Yeah, but that's what I
Yeah,
meant.
I saw you mention that. It's
Reflex.
totally true, because it's like what the category of what that ability is. But yeah, so players have to actively swing their weapon, like light heavy attack, like in most action games. And I think, so the combat has sort of evolved into its own thing. Some players compare it to Smash Brothers, actually, which is really interesting. Um, so so yeah, we borrowed a lot of things from the combat system. A lot of abilities are sort of based on Smash Brothers. Actually, the priest has something called Guided Star, which is very similar to Zelda's Din's Fire, which you can kind of control the Din's Fire up and down and like explode it at will. So there's like a lot of these little mechanics like that. Dota, there's a lot of stuff influenced from Dota, a game that I've played thousands and thousands of hours, which I feel like is the Dead Sea Scrolls of abilities. Like it's where everything comes from, like in terms of mechanics. Um, and then the world and exploration, a lot of influence from WoW, but also from other RPGs that we love, like Skyrim or Morrowind, those sort of things, or Breath of the Wild, Zelda, Dark Souls, etc. Yeah, so there's a lot of influences in there.
Lengthy list of influences. I love those. I'm sure when you're making a game, there's so many tiny things. We're in a room with full of great devs. They're like, wait a second, we could do this. Here's inspiration for this. You guys have been playing so many games for so long. I guess that kind of makes
Yeah,
sense.
yeah.
So when it comes to the classes, you said 4 classes. Correct me if is it rogue, priest, warrior, and I'm missing one.
Hunter, yeah,
Uh,
Hunter, yeah.
could
And then
you
we're adding the fifth now, which is the wizard. Yeah,
Oh heck yeah! Could you describe the class system to people? Because I like how you can like make your own house and you can swap between characters. But do you mind going into detail about that too?
yeah, yeah. So uh, in the live game right now, so we're launching a patch actually this Wednesday that's going to have a lot more content, which will include the wizard and a few other maps and more progression, etc.
Oh
But
nice.
right now, the live game that you played is yeah, you have the hunter, you have the warrior, you have the priest and rogue. They're all, so our philosophy with the classes, and I used to do class design World of Warcraft. I did that since when I started there. If you ever played the game since Wrath of the Lich King, there's something that you probably played that I made. Uh, and so I have a passion with creating spells and creating like little kits for classes. And so there's so much stuff that I working on World of Warcraft that I just didn't like, or I wish I could have redone, but someone else did it before I got there, or you really can't do in a game like WoW just because it is the combat system that it has. It's a stick camera, it's cooldowns. They don't have the kind of a lot of the mechanics that we have in the game. So when we first thought about each of the classes, it was how do we just make the ultimate version of this class based on everything that we've seen in every RPG fantasy game, and then what is like if the class didn't really have a great fantasy in the past, which I think like priests, for example, never really had like really great. Priests are usually just casters that could heal maybe, but they don't really have like really kind of cool mechanics. So for example, with the priest, I gave her each class in the game has items that they can craft that intertwine with the combat system, like are reagents. So if you think about World of Warcraft, warlocks in the past had like soul shards, or they had inferno stones that summoned creatures, etc. And I'll admit, one of the first things I did when I joined Blizzard was remove a lot of those things, because I felt like it was unfair that warlocks had to spend all of this while the other classes didn't. Also, hunters in the past used to shoot ammo with arrows, and every raid you had to buy these arrows, and players complain about it. So I removed a lot of it. But looking back, I think that actually was a mistake because a lot of these items create this cool fantasy with the class. Everyone has their own special items they make, it intertwines with the world. There's a lot of reasons why they're good. And so I added this mechanic to each class. So hunters have special arrows, warrior has sidearms, like other weapons they can craft and slot in there. And so for the priest, I created prayer cards, which one anime that I used to watch when I was younger was called Cardcaptor Sakura, and she had all these like cards that she would collect, and then each one would be like a kind of a spell or whatever. And so I gave her that mechanic of she collects cards, and the cards all have different spells on them. So it's something that priests don't have in other games, but I thought that could be cool, like an element. And then she could also like fly and then float, kind of like how Peach does in Smash Brothers. To make her feel different, her traversal feel different. So she was probably one of the bigger projects and still work in progress as well. But so anyway, we just kind of that was kind of the idea with each of the classes to start with what has been done in the past for the class and what we could elevate them to. It's very easy to create a bunch of spells that just do damage in interesting ways or just procs and haste increase and talents, but to really make like a really specific gameplay loop where they play very differently than any of their classes and they have signature strengths that no one else has and it feels really cool through the fantasy of it, that's really challenging to do. But anyways, that was the priest. The warrior, I think, is kind of one of the most challenging classes to design because uh he just uses weapon, he just uses physical weapons, and it's harder to do really crazy things there. So he does have a rage mechanic, which is pretty consistent with most RPGs. um that you build up, and when you take damage, or when you do damage or take damage, it builds rage and you can consume it. We gave him, like I mentioned, he has different sidearms that he can bring in, so he's like the master of weapons. He just feels like he has a ton of weapons. So he has like a spear he could throw that pins you. He has a war horn that when you play it, it has a really loud sound, but then also gives them full rage. So you can hear the warrior in a distance. Like you mentioned, like in the extraction genre, sound is usually a big part of it. And so there's risk reward with like loud sounds that plays, these sort of things. And then the hunter, pretty traditional. She has traps. She can apply multiple different afflictions, which a whole other system, but basically it's just debuffs, like these elemental debuffs that she could apply. And then the rogue has stealth, but then we thought a lot about stealth because usually in stealth it's like permanent invisibility, and so in our game, when you're stealth, you can kind of see him. It's like a shader on him, like a water shader looking thing, like Predator kind of thing. So while the rogue can stealth, you can see him, and he just doesn't have a permanent invisibility. But yeah, it's a long answer to talk about each class, but the crux of it is just it came from us looking at every RPG, what they did with the class, and then rethinking how we could do it in this type of combat system and trying to elevate it, right?
Yeah, and I like it how you can also swap between all these characters, different classes. So in your house, you can have one of each. I presume you can have the up to 5 once that comes out. So you got 5 classes to choose from, each with their own kits or abilities. Then of course you can level those skills as you go, and then you have a trait wheel too. So I don't want you to dive into that. People could play the game to understand it, but I like the way that you
Yeah,
progress and you can build these
yeah,
characters. And you can also, your inventory and your stash that you extract can be used across all of your characters equally. So you don't need to go in on one character, build up an inventory. You can keep an overall bank, as you might say, for all your characters, which I think is a cool feature.
yeah. That one in particular was very important to me because it came from playing other games where you have to switch off the character and log into another and then switch it over, and then you have mules and all these things like that. And so instead, I was like, how about we just have like one stash where they all kind of use it? And so I'm really happy with how that turned out for sure. Yeah.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. Big old QOL update there, and I agree it's a good one. How long has all of this been in development to date, and how many devs have been working on this project?
Yeah, so probably for me it's gonna be like my 5th year. For most of the team, it's like 4. Or for the company itself, it's like more around 4 years or so. And the team size right now is 24 full-time employees. For a long time in the very beginning, we stayed at around 8 to around a peak 12 for like over 2 years, just prototyping the game. That's a whole other conversation to talk about its production of it, but I have a lot of thoughts there too. But that's the details there to answer your question.
So what do you say for people? We've been talking a lot about PvP. What would you say to people who are maybe deterred by that? Like I wasn't a big PvPer, I wasn't a big PKer back in the MMO
Mhm.
days. So
Yeah.
what do you say to people who might be a bit deterred by the PvP aspect? Is it, is it overwhelming? Is it well balanced? And of course you of course have PvE as well. But what would you say to those people?
Yeah, no, I totally get it. PvP, um, there's a large segment of players and different spectrum there, people who enjoy different things. PvE players, there's way more PvE players than PvP, but PvP usually is just stickier. Uh, uh, um, they're more of a stickier player base, and then PvE is kind of like they tour around different games or whatever. And so for us, starting out the game, we wanted to focus on PvP first because it's the hardest thing to do. If our vision is to grow the game, grow the IP to more of an MMO over time, starting with PvP is what you should do because the ogre is not going to complain if the combat system is broken and imbalanced, the creature, but the player will, and so you really have to focus on getting those mechanics right. Like for example, StarCraft probably built as PvP first, and then after they figured that out, all right, let's build the campaigns because that's easy compared to the PvP part of it. So we started with that first. Um, Even though it is PvP, it's not like most PvP games where you go into a match and it's 6 for 6 death match and you're gonna, kill and be killed multiple times. It's in an open world, and so you can kind of avoid the other players. Our closest game to ours, another influence of the game is Tarkov, and in Tarkov, yes, it's PvP, but a lot of times you never really get into a PvP engagement. It's more of like you're on a hunt and you're kind of avoiding them, or it's kind of like a horror game in some ways. And so our game is kind of similar, which is not every match you'll get into a PvP engagement, but the threat of it there kind of adds to the thrill. And so if that sounds exciting to you, then yeah, the game is a fit. But if you just cannot stand other players fighting you, I totally get that. Our goal with the game is to grow it over time and to add more PvE experiences to it, and like I mentioned, grow it to an MMO at some point. So maybe check back in when it gets there. But I think it's worth checking out just to see the class system, to kind of see the world that we've built, to kind of get an idea there. Early feedback is always useful, even for where we're going.
Yeah, I've really been enjoying it. I'm not a big PvPer, so when me and my girlfriend were playing, we're trying to avoid people, but it was always a nice, scary surprise when all of a sudden we are like, wait, those are real people. Like, oh, frick, these mobs are attacking real people because sometimes your mobs will actually attack each other. So you're like, wait,
Yeah,
is that them attacking a real person? And then we found out and it was too late. But it makes the runs you get out all the more exhilarating. So as someone who is not a big
yeah.
PvP fan, I was very surprised how much I enjoyed it. And the PvE is also like extremely satisfying. So
Cool. Yeah.
I've never seen like an extraction like this, or at least I haven't played one like this. So it's been a fun time. Speaking of which, though, when we typically see these extraction games, we typically see extraction shooters. So going into
Yeah.
this, how do you guys sound like trying to compete with a typical extraction shooter whilst being an extraction RPG?
Yeah, it's been interesting to kind of look at our player base and see where they come from. One assumption I had in the very beginning was a lot of World of Warcraft or MMO players would play it, and certainly there are a number of them who play it. Another assumption that I had was like, oh, everyone who plays extraction shooters would check it out, and there are some players who play that, but actually, our cohorts are come from all over the place. Like a lot of New World players, because they had changed their systems and they don't like that, and so our game is kind of a replacement for that. There's a lot of like survival crafting players, like players who like Valheim or Sea of Thieves was a large cohort of people who came up to play Legacy. So it's been interesting to kind of see that our the goal with the game was never to like, oh, we're going to compete with FPS extraction games, because I feel like first person shooter and action base is so different that it's hard to say that they overlap that much, but there has been some of those players who do play the game for sure. But I think a lot of them, this is a new type of genre. This is a new type of game for them. There's a lot of players, this is their first extraction game they've ever played. They tell us. There's been some that have told us this is their first like PvP fantasy game they've ever played. So there's a lot of like it's a new emerging genre, I think, and but. Yeah, that was part of the idea too, is just that, look, I feel like we're really saturated with FPS extraction. Um, it's everyone is seeing them launch now, but as a founder and someone in a startup, I know a lot of the other founders and startups. I know what games they're making. I'm like, oh my God, everybody's making extraction shooter. We were like one of the few, I think, making an RPG extraction game. So yeah, I think it's just an opportunity. So we're kind of segmented off there, but yeah,
Interesting. When it comes to playing with friends, so you guys have solos and mixed, but for
yeah,
casuals out there, who want to play with friends, how can they drop in? Can they drop in as a solo, duo, trio? How do those lobbies work?
yeah. So in the build that you played, because you're playing the live game, there's two modes. There's solo and mixed. Mix is kind of you can play solo into mix as well. So it's a mixture of solos, duos, and trios, so up to three. And so in the game, you could add your friends and then queue into mixed with up to two others. So that can work. What we're adding in the next patch in a few days is you'll be able to queue duos. So you and just one other player can queue together. That was a big community request, and it's not that we didn't like that idea. It was just more of the more queues you have, the more diluted it becomes and harder to manage the queue times. But yeah, so those are the options if you want to play with other your friends.
So is mixed up to three? Sorry if I missed that.
Yes, yeah, it mixes up to three. Like we support squads up to three.
Nice. And are there wipes?
There are. So we're gonna do our first wipe actually this Wednesday.
No, you waited
Um,
till I started playing to wipe.
you didn't read the Steam news.
No, I
Yeah,
didn't.
yeah. It's okay. Yeah. Hopefully you didn't get any too crazy stuff. But yeah, we're gonna wipe on Wednesday.
In the future, how intermittent are these wipes going to be?
It's a good question. I don't know completely yet. Our cadence right now is like 3 months, which is pretty traditional for
Yeah.
seasons to wipe. As the game gets more and more content and more items, we may lengthen the window of wipes. Like Tarkov now only does maybe one or two wipes a year, it feels like. So we'll grow into that and kind of see. But right now it's like every 3 months.
Yeah, I think we'll talk about it in a bit, but as you stepping stone in that more MMO style, the longer wipes would maybe get people going. But yeah, I think 3 months
Right.
is. I mean, it's got to be tough to choose, but there's a lot of right answers. So that's interesting to see how that's going to develop. When it comes
Yeah.
to you playing the game, I'm sure you said 5 years now um, from the start. So what is your favorite part about the game?
What's my favorite part? Well, I mean, my favorite part is just the class design and combat and movement of the characters. I've been playing a lot of. There's been a lot of time just me just playing this game and not a lot of other games, but I have been playing some of the other games. And like their movement just kind of sucks compared to ours, and I just miss kind of the combat system that we have in our game. So I really just love the combat and the class design, which I did a lot of in this game, the most. That's my favorite. That's probably my favorite thing. But there's a lot to love. I love the art aesthetic, the style of the game. It's beautiful, and game looks way better than I originally imagined. I kind of thought we would hodgepodge stuff with store assets as a small indie studio, but the team is just amazing, and they created something really special. So I love the art as well. And then the itemization and crafting. So one of the early WoW classic, or early WoW designers who did a lot of the items in the game. A friend of mine is working at the studio right now as a contractor, and so he's done a lot of the itemization in the game too. So you could kind of tell like the flavoring of the items. It feels like old WoW a little bit. That's because of him. Um, and so I enjoy that too. And something we're also juicing up in the next patch is this system called the Lodge. The Lodge is the equivalent to like say the Tarkov hideout. It's like where upgrade these furnishings like your bed that gives you rested experience, or a storage chest which gives you more stash tabs, etc. But in the next patch, it will feel more of like Valheim or a survival crafting game where the different furnishings have input and output. So you put in like scraps and it creates them to full leather pieces and stuff like that. So yeah, you can kind of see where we're going with the game, just even though it's in the UI right now.
Yeah, I was gonna mention the house and lodge. Now I don't have to, but it's a nice feature.
Yeah.
So you mentioned earlier gameplay loop. How do you guys keep? Because obviously with an extraction like this, you're just highly repetitive, right? And you have a
Mhm.
beautiful map and so many different PVE engagements you can have. But eventually, when someone plays for 3 6 months straight, how do you
Yeah.
guys avoid that gameplay loop feeling so monotonous? Is it going to be? And I know you mentioned before, but like constant map updates, new POIs, new loot, monsters, etc. How are you guys going to keep that gameplay loop refreshing?
Yeah, it's a big focus for us in a PvP game. First of all, every match is different because different players are in it. Different things can happen. This rogue is in the match hunting you down. This one match, the other one, you find another priest who talks with you in prox chat and is helping you do stuff, that sort of thing. So every match can kind of automatically feel different because of the social player aspect of it, for sure. But um, so that is like one thing. The other is just there is random drops that happen on map in terms of itemizations. So that changes, what happens that match. You may extract early if you find a really great item. So you get a lot of stuff out of the box, just kind of making the game that we have in our genre. But something that we're adding, and you can see in this next patch, we're adding a night version of the map that changes all the loot in the game, changes all the spawning, changes the extracts, changes the spawning points. So a lot of stuff changes when it's night. It's not just a simple like lights off experience. There's also total gameplay changes. And then in the future, and not this season, but after it, we're going to be doing a lot of little dynamic events. So some things could spawn differently in the map. A total POI in area can shift based on when randomly when you go in, or maybe randomly during the match too. So that is something that we're going to be working on to make it feel a lot different and shake it up each time you queue.
Nice. A few more closing questions, but one was a really common
Yeah.
community one, including for my girlfriend. When is controller support coming for this game?
Yeah, so if you could try the controller right now, it does work a lot for the combat. We've improved it actually. That's one thing I forgot to put in the patch notes because we did spend some time on that. Is making the controller work a lot better. The Steam community too has created like another some I don't know what you call it, like a little add-on or something that you can download that makes the controller feel a lot better. The vision, so on our roadmap in the next this time next year, our goal, or like within a year or so, is kind of like our goal is to release the game to Gold Master, and part of that is console support, and so that would be full controller support everywhere, like all menus, all UIs, etc. So I would say the game has partial controller support, but it's something that we prototyped with the game since the beginning, and that's why we have the combat system that we do with the number of abilities that we do. It's because we wanted it to work on a controller. Funnily enough, originally this project was a skunk works, or like because we had this thing on the WoW team where every year you could spend a few months working on whatever you want. And what I did was trying to make the WoW combat system work on a controller, which if you ever played that game, you'll know it's like impossible. And so then I started redoing the combat for WoW to work on a controller, and then those are some of the elements that eventually turn into legacy. Is that I started thinking about the combat system and how to make something like WoW work on a controller. So this is that's the vision for the project. And so anyway, long story, but we it will have it by Gold Master, and it's something we'll improve over time.
Yeah, I think that's huge with especially all these open world games. It's so huge to see those kind of things. Even bigger though is something you announced. I think it was about last week, where and you've already mentioned in this interview too, where this is going to be a
Yeah.
stepping stone. You guys have made this extraction RPG, but the eventual goal for this game legacy is to be an MMO, which got me extremely excited. So can you give me the little tidbits on where that discussion started and where this game might go with that?
Yeah, yeah. So I love MMOs. My guild, like I named the studio after my guild. I have a lot of great relationships I created with people in that guild. It's the first time I ever talked with anybody who lived in Europe or in Australia, etc., like that. So I think there's so much awesome aspects of an MMO game, and there's just not a lot of them, and for a good reason, because they're incredibly hard to make. They're incredibly expensive. Uh, Even today, we've had a lot of advancements, and I think you'll see a lot of larger games ship that just 10 years ago would be impossible with that team size. And so it'll become more and more achievable to create an MMO over time. But out of the box with Unreal, you have to have like one of the best server engineers in the world to create an MMO if that's your goal. It just doesn't support it right now. So it was always our goal to do that. And so I thought about, if that's the ultimate goal, how do we build this game? There's this project at Blizzard called Project Titan, which was the predecessor to Overwatch. They were trying to make a second MMO at the studio. That team was over 100 people, which today is not a lot, but back then it was a lot, because the WoW team was probably like 150 or something at that time. But yeah, it was 100 people, and it cost over 100 million probably to sustain over its lifetime, and they didn't ship anything, right? Because it's so hard to do. It's so hard to create a new MMO from scratch. And this was the leader of MMOs, right? I think even you could argue today in the West. And so why is that? Why did that project fail? And you could talk to people on that team, but generally it's just really hard to do. It's really hard to build all these systems at once, a combat system, the world, crafting, all these things at once. And so I thought, how about instead do crawl, walk, run? And so it's iterative. There's steps over time to build it out, right? So Legacy is what the crawl. Legacy is the first chapter. So with this, and we did a lot with this game. There's the IP, there's the characters, there's the crafting, there's the combat. There's the world experience, there's the creatures, etc. So we have a lot there. What we don't have is PvE content, like story content, so that sort of thing. We don't have seamless worlds, so we don't have like you can go from one map to another, etc. They don't seem like the hard part, but those are kind of like the hard part. The content is a challenge because you spend, and a lot of us would lament about this on WoW, like especially the artists, they spend like 6 months a year working on content. The players go through it in 15 minutes, and they're like, oh, that was really cool. That ceiling was really nice. And yeah, that ceiling, they took like, I don't know, 3 months to make that, but whatever, we'll just run through here. And so you got to have this huge team to create this content pipeline, right? So yeah, anyway, this is a crawl, walk, run goal of building it out. I think even if I had hundreds of millions of dollars, this is what I would do. I would still build it off in this small crawl, walk, run model, and have this initial game, and then a second game, and maybe then you do the MMO or whatever it is. And it can be in the same game, it can be separate games. I don't know. We haven't figured that out just yet, but that's a long-term vision, is to build it out this way. When I left Blizzard, Mark Merrill, he called me, and Mark Merrill is a founder of Riot, and they're building an MMO at Riot, right? And he was asking me, how would you build an MMO? Because they're building theirs right now. And I said, well, this is what I would do. Exactly what our strategy is. I said, you should be. It's so hard to do. I mean, if anyone can do it, probably Riot. But the thing is, you want to build it in this crawl, walk, run way, I think, because it's a lot more smart. It de-risks a lot of things, and then you can make some money along the way with these other games that service different types of player. But anyways, that is a long-term vision, and that's a strategy, I guess.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because when you think about the biggest MMOs, we've already mentioned both of them so far, but there are others out there, and especially nowadays, people are expecting an MMO to somehow drop and have everything, which is just, it's not like when we first played WoW and RuneScape, those weren't the projects they are today.
Yeah.
They've been building over the last couple of decades themselves. And so I like that incremental step. And like you said, you can not only be transparent with your community, and people are willing to spend. If you can promise a good future project, even if it's 5 years from now, 3 years from now, right? Maybe don't stretch it out too far, but people want to see something great built. And so I like that incremental step of like, here's a great game on its own, but we can still improve upon this and give you a whole new experience in a different genre if we want to. Would you
Yeah.
guys be keeping some of the extraction aspect? Because with this being the initial, I'm sure you're going to have some diehard fans who will always want that aspect. Is that something you're going to keep along with it in some form or fashion?
Yeah, it's hard to say because I don't know realistically when we'd be able to ship the MMO, just because it all contingent on a million things about how successful Legacy is, and whether we get future investment or whatever it is, right? So it's hard to say for sure, but I think we would probably keep the extraction mode because I think it fits very well in even if I think about an MMO, it fits very well in an MMO game. To be honest with you, the extraction kind of came from Ultima Online or World of Warcraft or other games like that, where, in those games, the extraction was use your Hearthstone to go back to town or whatever, right? Yeah, I think it makes a lot of sense to have in a game like ours. Where I think, the future of MMOs are going, is as well. I think the other reason why there's not that many games out there is because when you say MMORPG, everyone imagines, okay, you need to have the full checklist of what every other MMORPG has ever had in this game. Otherwise, you can't use that term, right? And that closes the door on a lot of games. It makes it really hard to develop one. And by the time you release the game, everyone is crunching. You're spending like 10 years on it, hundreds of millions of dollars, probably, at least. And then you have everything that WoW has right now, maybe. Like if you fucking killed it, right? Like if you and then but that's not enough because people will play and go, well, it's cool, it has better art, but there's just nothing new. And so it's really hard to do that. But I don't know where I was going with this, but the question was, if we would have extractions in this game, probably. Yeah.
So this game being early access, is there
Yeah.
an official release you guys have in the timeline?
Oh yeah. It's sometime in a year is kind of what our goal is. So probably around this time next year is when our goal for Gold Master is. It's don't hold me to that because anything can change between now and then, but that's kind of what our goal and our production plan is right now. And then, like you mentioned, the patch is going to be on Wednesday. That's going to be a new season, new wipe, new class, the Wizard, two new maps, a night version of Greenwood, and then also Dawnhammer Crypt, which is our first kind of like interior dungeon. So we have open worlds, but then now this will be the first one that has like more of a dungeon interior. And so yeah, that's the short term and then long term vision. And then the MMO piece, that would be probably several years, I'd imagine, just because there's a lot more we have to build out technology wise. Although I just heard that podcast with Tim Sweeney, he was saying Unreal 6 is like built for MMOs or something. I was like, oh, interesting. So
One
I
can
don't
hope.
know, maybe they could line up.
Yeah, that was awesome, man. I kept you longer than I know that you're a busy guy, but I had so many questions for you, and hopefully we can talk as we get closer to the MMO in the coming years. We can talk more about that again in the future. But I appreciate your time. It
Yeah.
was a great conversation, man. A great game. People should check out and give it a try. And definitely for me, it's been a unique experience in a world full of repetitive games. This is definitely a unique one.
Yeah. One thing we're gonna do as well is have like a free to play weekend this weekend. So if you just want to check it out to kind of get the vibe of the game and the combat, even if this isn't the game for you, but the MMO or like PvE is for you, then you can give us feedback just in the combat system and the vibes of the game too, just so we know as we're building that out as well.
Heck yeah. I'll wrap the interview right there. But if you ping me again this weekend, I would love to shout it out. I could